Greetings, builders. Welcome to my workshop. I'd like to introduce you to the finally completed B2 Emo. This is the Michael Baddeley version 2 B2 Emo. I started building him back in August of 2023. I had the first version of him completed by June of 2024, just in time for DroidCon. And then I spent the most of the last year essentially rebuilding him, practically from the ground up, with a lot of enhancements and modifications, and most importantly, lessons learned from the first go-around of building him. Now, I never really did any sort of retrospective or look-back video on my R2 build, but I thought that I would take advantage of this opportunity, since B2 is becoming more and more popular among the droid builders, to just sort of give you a pretty deep dive into everything about what has gone into this particular build. I'll take you through the electronics, take you through step by step, highlight all the things that I've modified and changed, and different course corrections that I took over the course of the build. These are things that are pretty common with just about any droid build, but more so with this one than on my R2 build. I really had to chart my own course a number of times, and that's something that all droid builders, if you aren't already comfortable doing that, you probably need to learn to become comfortable doing that. So I wanted to, first of all, take an opportunity to show you all that, but I'd also like to take an opportunity to thank all of the designers, Michael Baddeley and your entire team, for what you've put together with this build. It's absolutely fantastic. It was a joy to put together. It got frustrating from time to time, but never to the point where I really felt like throwing in the towel. Dave Ferreira's Pro Head Mech was a game changer. That was a big impetus for me, wanting to basically rebuild him from the ground up. All the other builders on the B2 Facebook group, your builds are all inspirational in one way or another, and I thank all of you guys for your support. But anyway, without further ado, let's go ahead. Let me start taking him apart and get him down to his bare essentials, so to speak, and then we'll go from there. Oh, and by the way, this is probably going to take a little while, so if you're not already, get comfortable, pour yourself an adult beverage of your choice, and sit back and relax.
All right, so now with B broken down, we can start by taking a closer look at the drives. B's got 4 drives. The front right and the left rear are identical. The front left is a unique one if you do the stock build. The right rear is unique then mainly because of the foot shell. The foot shell that goes on top of that drive is a different shape, and so the structure is slightly different for that version of the foot. I know at least one builder has built a version of B that's representative of the Season 1 episode where you saw him in his younger days when he was a little bit cleaner and newer, and he actually had 4 matching feet, so you certainly could just duplicate that drive and make the opposite corner drives identical. Structurally, my drives are entirely stock. I didn't make any changes to the print files themselves, although looking closely, it's a little bit of a tight squeeze here with the lifting mechanism. Had I thought about it, I might have hogged this out a little bit, increased the clearance a little bit. As it is, I just had to carefully bend those tabs a little bit to improve the clearance of the motors. These are the stock Pololu 50-to-1 24-volt motors, and they are running 4-inch Andy Mark Mecanum wheels. The drives, as they are a little bit on the slow side. You do get the additional torque that the slower motors provide. Really the best way to improve the drives would be to go with 6-inch Mecanum wheels. At least one builder had modified his version 1 for that. And then you've also got Tim Hebel's Incredible Pro drive, which would probably more than double the cost of this entire build, so I'm not going to go that route just yet. But the only other changes that I've made to these drives, as you see here, I mentioned in a previous video that I replaced all of my 8.4 volt servos with direct power 24 volt servos. They're the same footprint, they're just drop-in replacements. I just don't need to do any voltage step downs in order to power these servos. And then on these little TPU linkages that connect the servo horn to the lift mechanism, I did take little bits of brass tubing and I made bushings for the holes. I had to enlarge the holes slightly and hopefully that will just improve their longevity. In terms of disconnects, all I really did here was I shortened the servo cable so I could have an extension right here. The power line for the motor is just a direct run into the rear channels, which we'll talk about a little bit later. All right, so pressing on to the chassis. So one of the big improvements that I made for my Bee, especially once I started my sort of rebuild of him, was I doubled my battery capacity. And so for that, I completely modified this front pocket. I removed the large holes and all the geometry that was reserved basically for power switches. And instead, I added my own XT90 mounting points, basically going off of what Alec Muir did for a similar front pocket. However, I added a little bit of extra structure in there for the pigtail connection. I still have my main power switch, which is accessible underneath, and yeah, that definitely improved things. I also modified a handful of other parts, such as these front risers here, to have heat set inserts so I could attach my Wago tray, so to speak. Also, for the little angle pieces that the front and rear pockets attach to, I added heat set inserts on there, so I had to enlarge those holes and customize that. But having the dual battery setup should definitely help improve his chances of lasting an entire day on a single battery charge. So clearly one of the biggest improvements that I made, and what I would consider to be an essential modification, is Sky Hoover's battery boxes and mid-deck. The battery boxes are a nice thing. You can even include a strap to help hold them in place. But by far, the two most important things this mod gives you is it gives you this extra layer or level for additional components. And then the key enhancement are these two interface locations where you can position your connectors for the stack up above. In fact, I've got over here, this is an extra base plate for above. I did modify the pass-through openings to match my particular needs, my configuration, but you can see that when you plop that on, it just snaps right into place, and you have your nice protected interface. Which, another pro tip, if you are going to be working on B and you need to turn him upside down to get to the chassis, definitely print an extra one of these and add some magnets so you have a nice little working platform for him. You can set him upside down. Everything is below the level of this platform. So one of the implications of using Sky's battery boxes is that the pass-through for wiring from underneath is relocated. So you have these wiring channels on each side. You know what, let me actually turn B over and you'll get a better sense of what other changes were needed in order to accommodate these battery boxes. Okay, so we've got B upside down. You can see his underside a little bit, and you can see how each of the 4 drives and the lift servos have a separate pass-through into the top side of B's lower chassis. Now 2 of the corners, this one here and the opposite one over here, have a very direct pass-through into one of the side channels, and there's no real problem there. The other 2 corners, however, coincide with these base plates, and these are the plates that form the floor inside B's lower body. And in order to pass the wires through, you will need to modify those and include pass-through holes. So if we look here, we've got a pass-through hole right there, and then similarly on the other side, you've got a hole right there. So you will need to modify those in order to have easier access to the wiring top side. But other than that, you're pretty much good to go. So when using Sky's battery box and rear channels mods, you're going to end up doing a lot of your motor control wiring in each of these side panels here. You can see the forward motor wiring exits through this hole right here, and the rear actually comes in through the pass-through, which is underneath this bundle of wires here. I have both of those runs from the motors basically terminating in these Wago connectors here, and then from here I have it relaying into the relay, and then from there into each of the motor controllers. The relays themselves, they get their power through a run that goes through the wiring channel here and all the way up to the front here. This is basically a 24-volt distribution block, as well as this here in the back. Now, I actually have a lot of extra connections there. I was using them previously before I redid all of this, and I could probably get rid of that if I wanted to, but for now, I'm just going to leave it there. I'm using the swap boards, which are basically just a simple way to daisy chain servo wires together without needing any sort of crimp-on connector. These are just screw-on terminals. So each of the lift servos terminates in a swap board, and then from there I just have it running into the Maestro, which is under here. So one of the cool things with Sky's battery box mods is he provides step files for everything. So it's really easy for anyone to customize these to suit their needs, which is exactly what I did. I added a little raised area sized for these relays with some heat set inserts so I could fasten those down. Likewise, for these little Wago trays that I modeled, there's a heat set insert under each pair of these to hold them down in place. All right, pressing on. So I mentioned before, one of the cool things with the mid-deck mod is having these interface points. Again, these were both customized to my needs. It's very straightforward to do. You can even increase the size of the cable pass-throughs. I updated the shape of the board to fit different things. For these, I'm using the same Milmax Pogo connectors that called for in the Pro Head Mech. One of these is for audio, and the other one is for the Maestro daisy chain. And then back here, simply have a 24-volt power connection to run everything upstairs. And then I have the two motor outputs from the Sabertooth. That's still back here for the upper and lower rings. So one other change that I've made recently, actually as a result of my experience at DroidCon 25, is the amplifier. This is the amplifier that I had in there, and it's a great little amplifier. The sound quality was great, volume was fine, but this little guy has Bluetooth. You can't disable it, and there is no security for the Bluetooth. And wouldn't you know it, we were in the conference hall, and at least 3 builders were using the exact same amplifier. And when someone tried to access theirs via Bluetooth, the other droids started making strange sounds as well. So the Bluetooth kind of was unsecure, and they started playing some weird sounds. And then you would expect if you tried to send it an audio signal through the aux input that it would kick it off of Bluetooth, but that wasn't the case. The only way I could regain control was to reboot B, and then it would only last until someone else tried to Bluetooth their audio. So I decided that I wanted an amplifier that did not have any Bluetooth. Now there is a much smaller version than this behemoth that I ended up in here. This guy barely fits. I think D-Rock makes a much smaller 24-volt amplifier that would probably be up to the task, but I decided to give this one a try. One nice feature about this is it actually has a remote volume knob, so I was able to mount the volume knob over here so it's accessible from the front. This does barely fit. In fact, the lift mechanism, when it drops down, is just clear of that board. But it does fit, and the overall sound quality is just fine. And now with the upper level removed, you can see the Kyber board, which resides here on the forward lower portion of B's chassis. The SD card with all the sound files is accessible from the front. The nice thing with Kyber is it runs on just about any voltage, so I have 24 volts direct into the Kyber. And then the only other connections we have are the S-bus from the receiver, and then we also have the Maestro connection that goes to the downstairs Maestro. The audio connection comes out from the Kyber into a ground loop isolator, and then all the way up to the amplifier here. So in terms of modified parts, one thing that was really easy to do was on these little guard pieces here, I just added some simple pass-throughs for wiring, and that really helped keep things a little bit neater. I think I increased the gap here because at one point I had wiring run through here, but these pieces are really easy to modify. And the quality of life improvements you get by just adding cable tidy considerations throughout is just awesome. The other thing that I've done is since I've moved these parts around, all these boards, at one point I had the Kyber in the back, I had Maestro up in the front, I had an amplifier up here. Each time I moved those parts, the mounting points changed. I would need to include standoffs in different locations, or I needed holes in different places. And rather than have to take B down all the way to his chassis and replace those floor panels, I designed inserts, one for the forward bay and one for the rear bay. And what that does is it allows me to customize standoffs and place holes or threaded inserts or raise sections that I need to, and just print a new insert, and then the insert attaches to the chassis with the existing screw that connects the base plate to the V-slot extrusions underneath. That's turned out to be fantastic because, like I said, I've moved stuff around too many times, and if I hadn't done that, my chassis would either be Swiss cheese by now, or I would have taken them apart at least a dozen times. And so to wrap up the core electronics, we'll take a look at the rear section of B on the lower level. Here's another place where I've made several changes since my initial build. Back here is where I have my RC receiver, as well as a 12-channel Maestro. Now the RC receiver, I originally had a 10-channel receiver, a TDR10. I ran my 4 drives, as you see there. I also had my upper and lower rings wired to it, and then plus you also need an S-bus connection. So that was 7 channels out of the 10 that I was using out of the receiver at that point. And then I decided I was going to do the Pro Head Mech, and at first I thought I would need the extra 4 channels there, which would have put me at 11. And so that's why I was forced with the prospect of, well, do I go with a 12 or an 18? The cost difference was almost nothing, so I went with an 18. I later realized that I could just use another receiver in the head, and so I didn't need those 4. And I've also since decided to move my upper and lower rings onto the Maestro. Now, why would I do that? Well, basically anything that you might want to animate as part of a sequence needs to run through the Maestro so that Kyber can use its pass-through or its capabilities to relay to the Maestro in order to trigger animations. The drives, I don't anticipate ever wanting to include drive motion as part of an animated sequence, so it just makes sense to free up the pass-through channels and have those wired directly to the receiver. In reality, I could probably get by with, at this point I'm only using 5 channels. I could get by with a 6-channel receiver here, but you do have flexibility. So just make sure, though, that you do run your drives direct to the receiver and reserve 1 channel for S-bus out. So the other main change that I made was, initially I had a 18-channel Maestro in the base, and I ran all my servos from that one Maestro all the way up the stack. And that was a big mistake. That ended up being way too complicated with the wiring. My wiring umbilical up here, instead of just having the 4 conductors, which I have now, to daisy chain to a second Maestro, I had 6 different servos that I was passing all the way up to the stack. So definitely was smarter to break that down into using multiple Maestros, which Kyber supports really easily. The only tricky thing is that this little connector here, you do need to get creative in terms of splitting some of the connectors. So this here are the connections from the Kyber, and then it actually splits out, and then this relays around and goes up to this pogo here. So that pretty much wraps up the core electronics. Let's continue a look around the chassis. And then finally we come back to B's rear pocket. This is another place where I've spent a lot of time recently making a few changes since DroidCon. Back here is usually where you will find the motor controllers. Now initially, I was using 3 of the Sabertooth 2x12 RC motor controllers. But as you can see here, I now only have 1, which is for the upper and lower ring motors. I had a strange situation happen at DroidCon, but now thinking about it, I think the signs were there that something wasn't right for a while. One of the channels on one of the Sabertooths just kind of went bad and eventually caused a drive motor to burn out. The warning signs, I think, were there. He was having issues strafing. When he would strafe, he wouldn't really go straight. He would kind of drift a little bit forward or back. Thinking about it now, that was probably a sign that one of the channels wasn't quite working as expected. Anyway, I had the option of just replacing the Sabertooth, or in true builder fashion, I just decided to go in a completely different direction. After talking to some of the other builders at DroidCon, I decided to give the GoBilda motor controllers a try. So I replaced my 2 Sabertooths with 4 of these 20 amp motor controllers. So these are 20 amp single channel motor controllers, so there's 2 stacked on either side. And they have been performing very well. They're very snappy, very responsive, and what's better is I no longer get this annoying lurch every time I power on B. The drive motors previously would just kind of jolt really weird. So anyway, that's been resolved. Let me take these out real quick and just show you quickly how I have these things configured. So here's a closer look at how I have these motor controllers set up. As I mentioned before, GoBilda suggests that if you need to, you can stack these together. So I have 1mm spacers in there, and then just the M4 hardware to attach them to threaded inserts that I have in the rear pocket. I designed these little brackets down below so that I could essentially tie both of the positive and negative power supplies to Wagos, and then just have a single pair of conductors come up, and those will attach to that central distribution block there. And then the outputs simply go into this little clip-in panel mount that I designed for the XT30s. It works reasonably well. There's really no significant problems there. Yeah, and the 14 gauge wire is just about the limit to what you can solder to the XT30s. And then finally the RC leads, I have the red wire clipped because all I need is the signal and ground. So I have both of them going to a JST connector, and then that JST connector just connects on this end here. I've got the other end, and then that goes into the 2 labeled connections there that go right into the receiver. All right, so B's base is pretty much put back together. As I mentioned before, I've essentially at this point built him twice. And if I had to give any advice in terms of what I learned and what I improved going from my first build to this build, it really kind of boils down to a couple of things. All the wiring rearrangement and moving stuff around, that's pretty inconsequential. But my biggest pain points with my first version of the build were the power drains and brownouts that I was getting with the servos, and then just the wiring complications going from the base up the stack. And my approach for solving both of those problems is just one way. It's not necessarily the only way. When it comes to the direct power servos, that was the option that I chose to get around the current bottleneck that any step downs would introduce. Now, granted, I was using a pretty inexpensive step down at first. I later updated to a nice one like this CC Beck Pro. This is from Castle Creations. These are fantastic. They're about $45 a piece. And if you decide not to go the direct servo or the direct power servo route, you definitely are going to want at least a few of these. I would strongly suggest putting 2 of them in the base, and then probably another one in the upstairs to handle the lift servos. And that's a perfectly valid way to go. You know, step downs are a necessary evil sometimes, and as long as you are careful to make sure that you're not pulling too much current through them, then you'd be fine. Another approach, especially if you're using Sky's battery box mod and you now have 2 nice cavities for batteries, is to run a completely separate battery bus for your servos. You could have a 6S LiPo for your 24 volt system and a 2S LiPo on a completely separate circuit just to power your servos. That's a perfectly good alternative as well. I know that's what Tim Hebel's done in his V1. I think there's at least a couple other bee builders that have taken a similar approach. So, you know, like with all things droid building, there's always multiple ways to solve problems. This is just the way that I solved mine. As far as the umbilical to upstairs, again, Sky's mod really helps with that. But I also switched from a single 18-channel Maestro in the base with every servo connected to it to daisy chaining 2 Maestros together. And that greatly simplified the wiring. I ended up with only 4 connectors for the Maestro going upstairs, and that greatly simplified everything. So, you know, there's definitely lots of different approaches. There's no single one way, but those were the 2 main improvements that I did in going from my first version of B to my second. So let's take a closer look at the stack.
So if you've made it this far, congratulations, achievement unlocked. Reward yourself with a nice long sip from your adult beverage or whatever else you might be enjoying. And we'll move on to what I usually refer to as the stack. This is B's central core. It looks a little bit like a wedding cake. You've got the Pro Head Mech. You have his upper or middle lift and then his lower lift as well. Back there is what remains of his original Head Mech. I'll touch on that a little bit, but there's a handful of things that I did want to show you on the stack that I'm particularly pleased with. First and foremost is what I'm calling my interface board right down here. This is what sits just above the pair of pogo connectors that are on the forward section of the mid deck, and that's where the audio connections for the speakers come up, and it's also where my daisy chain for the Maestro is passed through, and you can see those right there in the back. The audio simply passes through this conduit here and up to above where the speakers are going to be, and then the Maestro just powers the Maestro here. Maestro gets its servo power direct from the back here. Back here is where I have my block connector. One of these is 24 volt power. That comes into this Wago here. It gets split. One of them goes up here for the Pro Head Mech. That takes the 24 volts up higher. And then the third one is what goes into the back of my interface board. That provides servo power for the lift servos, as well as powers a small step-down converter that gives 5 volts to this Arduino, and this Arduino is what controls the body lights, the riser lights in the upper body. So the challenge when it comes to dealing with the stack is knowing that this entire structure moves, and despite how much room you think you have right now because everything is up, when this thing collapses, there's virtually no room in here other than the couple of spaces that we have. So I chose to add my electronics here. I've seen a couple of builders modify this bracket that holds the lift servo and have a panel right here with some electronics, and that works really well. But you do need to make sure that your wiring is at the same time securely fastened and held down. There's lots of zip tie locations here, but you also need to make sure that you have enough flex and enough slack to accommodate everything while it moves. So disconnects are your friend. Basically for this, I knew that this was going to be anchored, and I put a disconnect here, and then I knew that I needed a short pigtail here with the disconnect, and then I basically played with the lift servos and adjusted the lengths of the wire until I had what I needed. The end result, though, is this is really really neat and tidy. I love how this turned out, and it works really well. In terms of customizations, so the original Baddeley files called for 12 volt ring motors. There are mounts available now for 24 volt motors. I found that, I think it was actually for the upper ring, I still needed to adjust the height based on where my motor was sitting. But those should basically sit, you know, just a little bit above the surface of the Lazy Susan.
You do need to be mindful of the materials that you use. If you're making yours entirely out of ABS or ASA, you're fine. Certainly some of these lift mechanism, these gears, I've got those printed in ASA. They need to be pretty strong because this whole mechanism, once you add the upper body and the hat and everything else on there, I mean, you're talking about 20 pounds. So those servos need to be robust and those gears need to be robust. All right, moving up, we've got the Pro Head Mech. I won't spend a whole lot of time on this. I included a video series that detailed my experiences building this out. This is a game changer. It's fantastic. Here's where I've got the old receiver that I used to have in the base of B. That now I've migrated that one up here. This whole head mech is basically self-contained. What I can do if I disconnect those 4 screws basically holding this plate onto here, I can take those screws off. I simply have to disconnect the power from back here, cut that zip tie, and I can take the entire mech off and I can test it entirely standalone. It's great. It's beautifully modular, which is fantastic. I did also forget to mention that if you are using Sky's mid-deck mod, obviously you're going to want to modify this base plate here so that your openings and your cutouts and your pass-throughs are positioned and sized according to whatever connectors you decide to use. So other than this base plate, everything else was pretty much is the stock files. Once you get up to here, if you're going with the Pro Head Mech, you're going to have different risers here that have, I think, some additional cable ties available to you. I think there might be some geometry differences. I'm not exactly sure off the top of my head what they are, but this is where you start getting into custom stuff. Let's take a really quick look at the stock head mech and see what's different there. So this here is what remains of my stock head mech. You can see where I was passing power all the way up into the hat. Those went through these connections here, which attached to my little pogo connector that I had. It's controlled basically with 4 servos, 2 for the tilt, 1 for the turn, and 1 for the lift. Now I believe I had updated these to servos that could also take, I think, around 7 or 8 volts, just so that I was using the same voltage for all my servos, rather than having to deal with 8.4 and then 6 or 5 or whatever. But you can get by with whatever. You do have a little bit of room. The neck piece is what surrounds this. There is a little bit of space on either side for additional electronics, maybe some small step downs, something like that, as needed. The key things on here is, one, you need to make sure that these lift mechanisms are completely loose and really smooth. So that's important, obviously. Secondly, a lot of builders, I understand, have opted to use metal linkages rather than these flexible linkages. There is a little I think 1 or 2 millimeter steel rod in there to give this some rigidity. But in terms of longevity, you'd probably be better off with something that's a little more durable. So one thing that is somewhat important, I've mentioned it several times, is keeping your wiring neat and tidy. These designs are fantastic. They've got lots of places for zip ties. But one thing, though, that I have been using more and more of are these little adhesive clips here. If you haven't already discovered these, this is what they look like. They're really inexpensive from Amazon. They're really, really nice. They make a couple different sizes, but they have a nice adhesive. They go on pretty well, and they still come off cleanly. So I definitely I've been going through a lot of those between the stack, the Pro Head Mech, and then reworking all the core electronics. I've used plenty of those. So I think that kind of covers that. Let's take a quick look at B's head, and then we'll get them all buttoned up and we can take a closer look at some of the external features. So here we've got B's head. In case you've seen some of my other videos, Yeah, I am still missing a magnet. I covered this recently in a video detailing how I did his lighting system. There are going to be some updates to this in the not too distant future, but I did want to show you what I've got right now. So at this point, all I'm really doing is passing 24 volts up into the head. It relays around into this little electronics board where I have another one of those small Pololu voltage regulators that drops down to 5 volts, so I can power the Arduino that runs his eye lights. Now, one of the things that I do want to do in the not too distant future is I mean, right now his eyes just run a static routine. They're always on, and it's just a simple loop. I have no way of actually controlling them or triggering any sort of effects. I can get by that limitation by implementing some of the wireless control boards that Astromech user Greg Hewlett has created. And it's a great way to be able to wirelessly control microcontrollers and other such features in different parts of Bee's body. But in reality, once I add a wireless control board here and then have a second one downstairs that will be hardwired to the Kyber, I actually won't even need the Arduino anymore. I'll be able to simply have the light sketch on the WCB and have that control the light. So that way I'll be able to trigger a color change or some sort of an animation effect. So that's definitely the one of the top priority updates for me in the future. Now clearly he's missing his eye, and it's actually one of the things that I'm still working on at the moment. This is basically the eye globe that I had at DroidCon. And you'll notice that it's got some scuffs on the globe there. And the reason being is that I started with a 4-inch globe that I dremelled to make a hemisphere. And you see how much that sticks out. It actually sticks out far enough that it rubs on the inside of his upper body. So what I did find is I found these. These are advertised as 120 millimeter diameter. They're actually about 125 millimeter diameter. But when I trim that one down, you'll see it's sitting much flatter compared to the original. So this should give me that extra clearance, so there will be less damage, less risk of him actually scratching his eye. I still have the lights here from Printed Droid. There are also lights that were available from Greenwave. I'm not sure if, I know they've been out of stock for a while. I'm not sure if they're going to be providing additional updates or not. But there definitely are some good lighting options, and so I still may eventually add the little charge light. I think that goes down here in this corner here, but that's about where things stand with his hat. So let's get them all put together and take a look at the outside of Bee. Now, with very few exceptions, essentially all of Bee's external skin pieces are easily removable. Everything is modular. The foot shells are held in place with just a few magnets on each of the feet. These were single piece prints. And you also notice here one of the other distinctive features for Bee is his texturing. Now there's lots of different ways that you can approach the texturing. As I detailed in my build process, I initially tried using just standard joint compound, and while it gave me a good texture, they turned out to not be very durable at all. And I since switched over to 2-part body filler, Bondo actually, and that worked much better. It is much more durable, but it also has a very short working time. Several other builders have used, I think it's Freeform Air. It's a 2-part, very lightweight epoxy product. And apparently with a little bit of moisture, you can actually extend the working time pretty well, and they've had outstanding results with that. And then, of course, there are builders that have decided to go in a completely different direction and either come up with their own paint scheme or, in some cases, doing again, the younger B2 before he got too beat up, where his paint job is nice and smooth and uniform. But again, that's the joy of droid building. Make your droid the way that you want to make it. As for the panels themselves, I did make a couple of minor modifications to the front panel here. I needed a cutout to access my main power switch. This, when this is actually on B, you really can't see that at all from the front. And then this also shows you another pretty cool modification that I did, and that is I modified these lower risers to be magnetic. These actually are held in place with 2 magnets. I modified this side piece here in all 4 corners to have the magnets, so they just hold in place there. The stock build uses an interesting springy compliant mechanism where these are sort of hollowed out on the back. The idea being that it would give you a little bit of additional clearance when the upper body comes down. The drawback to it, though, is that there was structure underneath here that actually made this opening a little bit small. Now, I have these 5 amp hour LiPo batteries in there. These were the largest that I could fit into this space with that structure there. By taking that structure out, I could probably get some slightly larger batteries on each side. I can even lift these up if needed, in situ, and not have to worry about having to take anything apart. So I did share these updated files on the B2 Facebook group, but I will probably be posting them on my printables account at some point in the not too distant future. The only other change on the lower level is I am still using my modified rear panel. When I had my Sabertooth motor controllers back there, I was worried a little bit about ventilation, so I added these little slots. I actually kind of like the look. It's not Canon, but I kind of like the look that it gives. There's even some little blinky lights you might be able to see through there. I could, if I wanted to, maybe put some speaker cloth back there just to obscure that a little bit, but for now, that's the extent of my changes. So you can see there how easy it is to put these on. You can practically take them apart one-handed if need be. Now, these panels here are the clean versions of the panels. They have a more rounded edge. Initially, when I first built B, I only had access to the angular panels, and those had very sharp corners. I rounded them as best I could, but I've since replaced pretty much every panel, or every body panel on B, with the exception of the foot shells and the middle body section. There had been some talk about possibly doing some textured panels, but I think, between the various methods people have found to create their own texture, I think that's perfectly adequate. I don't know that those are ever going to be done. So let me put the stack on and get the next level on. Okay, so we've got the stack on. The next piece for B is the middle body section, and this is a large section that is held in place with these 3 different supports that mate to the supports on the lower risers, or the lower lift frame. Now, one thing that I did on my build, and this was really related to the lower risers, again, when they're on their compliant mechanisms, they tended to wobble a little bit. And so I actually had situations, there was actually a stretch of body that went behind this, leaving just the shaped opening for each of the lower risers. And I found that when the body was going up and down, if the lower riser was out of position, this little bar would get caught on that mechanism. So one of my early fixes for that situation was just to remove these bars altogether. It doesn't really impact the visual aesthetic at all when you're looking at it, even with the new magnetic risers. But that was definitely a problem that I had, and something that you might encounter as well with your build once you get your lift mechanism working. So this simply just drops over from above. All right, so you can see here that even at full extension, the magnetic risers are still tall enough that they completely fill the void. There's actually maybe a 1/16 of an inch or so of extra height in there. And I have confirmed that even when the lift mechanism is in the complete down position, there's still about an 1/8 of an inch gap between the upper risers that are attached to the upper body and the lower risers. So clearance really is not much of an issue. You'll notice here I really should try and touch up the paint here. I did find that, again, the upper risers slide in and out or up and down through this opening. I did have to hog that out a little bit just to improve the clearance and avoid any scraping that might happen when these lifts are operating. So attaching the upper body is the next step. That's the heavy one. You'll notice here with the Pro Head Mech, this plate here is essentially keyed. You've got the wide mounting point here, so you need to make sure that the plate is aligned correctly before you install the body. Additionally, you are dropping the body from above, and you just have to be very mindful of wiring. This is my my receiver connection as well as the servo wires, so I just have to be very careful when I'm dropping the body panel in there, but otherwise it fits on there pretty nicely. So let's get that one put on as well. On second thought, it might actually be easier to show you a little bit of the details about this upper body before I put it on B. So this is the upper body that was part of the Pro Head Mech updates. It has a couple of other enhancements that I detailed in that build. Mostly it has to do with the speakers. Now there are wiring channels inside as well as speaker accommodations in each of the four corners. One little modification that I did that you can see here is I created some little speaker grill covers. These are just simple two-part prints with a little bit of speaker cloth stretched between them, and they just press fit into those openings there. I'm not 100% sure that these are going to allow enough clearance for his head to completely turn. I know his eye globe is no longer a problem, but I'm not sure about the back surface of his head. So I have those in there right now. You can see some of the wiring that's in there. This is the neck. It gets permanently affixed. Over here, you have his greeble detail. This is magnetically held in place. This does need to be reprinted if you're doing the Pro Head Mech, because the geometry back in here is a little bit different than in the stock files. Flipping this over, you can see here the connection points for the body, and also how the Lazy Susan attaches. The inner race is fixed into the body, and the ring itself is free to rotate. All right, let's get this guy on there. All right, so you can see it is definitely a tight squeeze getting the upper body onto B. The one thing that you want to be absolutely clear of is make sure that these upper risers are properly positioned so that they drop into their respective openings. I've had some clearance issues, particularly with this one here, which is B's left rear upper riser. Sometimes that one doesn't always want to line up exactly where it's supposed to be, and if you power on B and he tries to collapse and lower the lift, and that's not in the right spot, it will torque everything out of position. Ask me how I know. Right before DroidCon, I had that exact thing happen to me, and it damaged one of the upper lift servo, and I needed to take apart the entire lift mechanism and rebuild it because I did not check that alignment there. So all that really remains now is to get his hat on, and then we can power him up. So one really quick note about paint colors. If you watch my build series, you might recall that I tried two different red colors for B's main body, Rust-Oleum Paprika and Bare Morocco Red. I ended up going with a Morocco Red. I really liked its slightly darker tones, and it went down really, really nicely. However, I don't think they make that in spray cans anymore. When I was finishing up my rebuild of B, I thought I need one more can of the Bare, and I could not find it anywhere. I barely had enough to get his updated panels completely painted. So if you are looking for paint, Rust-Oleum is likely going to be your best bet. All right, so let's turn this guy on and see what happens.
All right, so B is powered up. We can make sure that his head is functioning. Let's take a look at him in all his glory. So B's core functionality matches a lot of what he was able to do in the show. As you can see, he's got his drive extension. He's got the full mechanism drive set up, so he can rotate forward, back, and then more importantly, he can strafe side to side. He does have a little bit of wobble in his body because there's a lot of weight up there, so I'm not sure if anything can be done to correct that. He does have his body lift. Right now I have that set on a 3-way switch, so he's got 3 positions. His inner rings I have connected to momentary buttons at 2 different speeds. They kind of rotate in opposite directions, so I can go nice and slow, or I can go fast. And then I've also got his lifts, which can operate in unison like that, or if I set him up in tilt mode, now when I push the stick forward, instead of driving forward, he tilts forward, or he'll tilt back, or backwards, left, right. You can kind of do all of that stuff. So he can dance around a little bit if needed. He also has his head lift, and then of course he's got his head mech, which he's got the rotation and the tilt. So I'm still tweaking those mixes a little bit here and there, but that gives you an idea of really what most of his core functionality are. He does also have the ability to speak some of his lines from the show.
Cassian, I brought what you told me.
And he's got a handful of music tracks that he can play along too, but for copyright reasons, I'm not going to share those with you today. But this kind of gives you an overview of what was involved in the B build. Now, compared to R2, this was absolutely an evolution in terms of complexity, in terms of challenge, but it was a really, really fun build. And I really need to give a lot of credit to Michael Baddeley and all of the designers that worked on the initial version of B and then refined it into the version 2 that we see here. Dave Ferreira for his head mech, it's just really cool. It really brings him to life. It's certainly not an inconsequential path to take, but it definitely pays off in the end. And just know going into it that there's going to be a certain amount of find your own path and find your own solutions. Not everything is going to be answered for you, and as I demonstrated, there's lots of different ways to solve different problems. This is how I chose to build my B, but there's plenty of other options out there. So one of the things that I did suggest that I would do in this video is talk a little bit about budget. Every droid build is different. Depending on the choices that you make and the components that you use, it can obviously impact the budget significantly. A big portion of the budget for this build involved me getting my feet wet in RC, having to buy a transmitter, having to buy all the equipment, and starting from scratch probably added about $600 or $700 to the total build of this droid. The overall, I would say for the stock build, from beginning to end, including all of the hardware, all of the filament, the paint, everything there, I was probably in about $3,500 to $4,000. That would include the RC equipment. I think adding the Pro Head Mech probably added another $1.5 to $2K. I haven't really done a complete audit of those expenses, but that seems to be around the ballpark. You know, it's on par with most of the droid builds that you're going to encounter out there. I am looking forward to whatever the next build turns out to be. I have some ideas. I don't have a whole lot going on left with B, other than minor tweaks and adjustments, some fine tuning here and there. So if you've actually managed to make it to the end, congratulations. I am really super proud of this build. It was a chore, but it never really got demoralizing or too frustrating.
it was always a good time. So until next time, thanks again for watching. I really appreciate all of your support on the completion of this project, and I'll talk to you next time.